In this video, I will be demoing the setup of the AppV client, the AppV sequencer, and also the AppV management server. So now I will demo the setup of the AppV management server. You can see here I am using Microsoft Server 2008 R2. On this machine, to save time, I have already set up SQL 2008. Now, as I said, best practice would be to have your SQL placed on another server. However, for a proof of concept, it is okay to use SQL on your actual AppV server. You may also use SQL 2008 Express. You should also be aware that you should not have your AppV management server placed on a domain controller. However, to leverage AD for assigning your applications to users, your machine will have to be on the domain. Okay, let's begin. I will browse to my m.dvd, and then from there I will go to Microsoft Application Virtualization for Desktops. From here, what I want to install is the management server. You can see that the management server is actually version 4.5 SP2. That is because the management server component did not update when the new version of the client and the sequencer were released. So just go ahead and hit the install management server here. So the first screen is just the welcome screen. We can hit next on that. You will need to accept the license terms and conditions. Now, you can use the Microsoft updates, or if you do your own patching, you can choose to not use the Microsoft update. You can put in your username. Also put in your organization. Now you could do a typical default installation, but to show you the actual options, I will select custom here. So by default, it's pointing to C program files directory, like any good installation should. You could change that if you maybe have a special drive that you install your applications to. For this particular setup, I'm going to set up the management server piece, the management console, which is used as an interface for managing your applications. And I'm also going to install the management service. You will next need to configure your database. So here I've selected to submit or enter in my SQL Server hostname, and I'm just using the default port of 1433. You could create a new database or use an existing one. I'm going to go ahead and just create my own one. I'm just going to leave it as a default called app first. Now you can use enhanced security, which will use certificates just to encrypt the network traffic. It's not a necessity to use, but if you use certificates in your environment, it's a good option to have. For my POC though, I'm just going to uncheck it. Okay, for using RTSP streaming, you can select a custom firewall port, which you must have freely available, or you can use the default, which is 554, which I will use here. Okay, you can assign administrative rights using an AD group. I'll just select domain admins. And you can also give the default provider group. So just your default group of users. Next is the content path. This will be the application share. So when you're finished sequencing your applications, you will copy them to this directory. They will live on that directory, and when a user's client makes a call to stream down an application, it will look at that content share and stream from the contents there. Now, that should be it. If we hit install, our installation should complete. And as quickly and easily as that, your AppV management server has been set up. You will be required to restart your server. After your machine restart has completed, you should now have your management server set up. You can verify by going to the management console. And our management console is launched. You can see it looks like just a regular old MMC snap-in. That's because it is. This will be the interface you use for managing your applications, your virtual application. So you can go to connect to an application virtualization system. And you can also use a secure or unsecured connection. I'm just going to use unsecured, which would change the port from 443 to 80. And I'll select to use my current Windows account. And there we have it. We could see our server just got added there to the drop-down. If we expand that, we could see we now have an option for applications, file type associations, packages, application licenses, server groups, provider policies, administrators, and reports. We will go into these in detail later on. This has just been the setup video. To also verify, you can see there's now a default application which is put into the AppV management console by default on setup. This is for testing out your setup. However, to test out the setup completely, we must now set up an AppV client machine. Now I will show you how to set up the AppV client. I've just got a Windows 7 machine here for demo purposes. There's nothing on it. It is domain connected, as you have to be a member of the domain, so you're in the AD group for the assignment for AppV streaming to work. So I'm just going to go in again to my m.dvd. We're going to go to AppV, and this time I'm running Windows 7 32-bit, so I'm going to choose 4.6 SP1 32-bit. Now, first we see that there's actually two prerequisites for this. So they're set to pending, and they will install with this setup.exe. Once your prerequisites have installed, it's now time to install the AppV client itself. Just hit next on the welcome screen. I'm going to accept the terms and the license agreement. Updates, you can choose to disable them or leave them enabled. I'm going to go custom again so that I can show you all of the options. I'm going to leave it going to the default install directory. Now, the global data location is where the global machine level cache is going to go. The preferred drive letter. Now, this drive letter should be a drive letter that is currently free universally, so nobody in your enterprise currently has this drive mapped. You choose one that's free, and that gets leveraged by the AppV client for hosting the virtual environment. So I'm going to leave this at Q, because that's just the default. Next, we see the user-specific data location. So there's also a user cache. The user cache is used kind of like a sandbox for caching user-specific settings and configurations from the application. Now we can see the cache size settings. Now this is a pretty important configuration right here. You can choose to use the maximum cache size or use free disk space threshold. When you select to use the maximum cache size, what you're doing is setting a maximum yourself. Once your cache grows to that maximum size that you set, it will work on a last used policy. So if you have, say, an application that hasn't been used in a while, and then you try to launch another application and that application has cache, but the cache is full, the AppV client is going to have the smarts to say, okay, well, here's this application you cached a long time ago. I'm going to delete that from the cache to allow you to now cache this new application. Now, that application that's been knocked out of the cache could still be on the user's machine. They've got the shortcut. It just means next time they go to launch it, it will be as though it's them launching it for the first time again. So it has to stream down from the server. And it works fine. It works perfect because it's seamless to the user. And it's only actually comes into play when there's been like heavy usage. The other option is to use the free disk space threshold. Now this is a risky option. Using the free disk space threshold means that the AppV client will keep caching no matter what. So if you run out of space on that user's drive, the applications are just going to stop working. The AppV client isn't going to use any logic. It's just going to try and use as much space as possible. So you do not want that to happen, because you don't want that call to your help desk saying, hey, all my applications have stopped working. And it doesn't fail gracefully either. So moving on. The next screen, we can see that the default is to have require authorization even when cached, which means it's going to be checking the AD credentials. So it's going to ensure that the user is in the assigned AD group to allow them to launch the application. You can see that there's also an option that is not checked, which is allow streaming from file. Now, streaming from a file means that the AppV client can stream directly from a file. So the benefit of that is if you don't have a backend server and you're, say, using standalone mode, the AppV client will be able to find the SFT that's been directly cached on the user's machine and just stream from the actual user's local machine. So that's how the standalone works. And we can see here in our automatically load application and when to autoload options, it's got on launch, on login automatically enabled. What this means is the AppV client is going to check the AppV server for new applications and for updates to existing applications anytime you launch a virtual application, and also anytime you log into your machine. So anytime you log into the machine, it's going to refresh and bring down any new applications for the user. One that's unchecked there is on publishing refresh, which just means publishing a refresh to the server. And what applications to autoload. Now the options here: do not automatically load applications, automatically load previously used applications, or automatically load all applications. So the default option there is automatically load previously used applications. So that means the previously used applications are going to be cached. Therefore, it's going to automatically load them when the application is launched. So it's going to use the kind of background loading for streaming the application. And automatically loading all applications, it's going to automatically stream all applications. And do not automatically load applications is when you don't want it to ever try and stream the applications from the server. So all the applications would have to be cached to the local machine. And the actual application source root on the top of the screen, that comes into play when you aren't actually just pointing to the AppV streaming server. you may have a need for certain users to point to a different source for their applications, and you can configure a different source in that text field. Now here's the main part for setting up the client for the streaming server. So what we need to do here is set up a publishing server now. The first thing I'll do is go to the drop-down menu, because there's numerous options in here, and the default is set to Enhanced Security Application Virtualization Server. And you can see, if I uncheck this, that the default port is 322. Now, if you need extra security, you can use like RTSPS, which is real-time streaming protocol, but it's more secure. If you're not too concerned and you've got a pretty secure network that you're managing, you can use the Application Virtualization Server, which uses just RTSP. Likewise, you have an option for using standard HTTP, which would be using port 80, or you could use Enhanced Security, which is HTTPS. Now, you should be aware with HTTPS and RTSPS, as they are more secure, the performance may lag slightly compared to the other two options, as there's a cyclical check. Now, for this POC, I'm just going to select Application Virtualization Server, and as you may remember, that is RTSP streaming. The port is 554, which we actually already set as the default port. I'm going to set my display name as rorymon.com at the server. And now I need to pipe in the host name of my actual AppV management server. Okay, once I've got my host name in, just check the options, and it all looks fine. Now you can see the path is grayed out automatically. Path will come into play if you're using the HTTP or HTTPS streaming protocols. The setup is slightly different. You'd be using an app list to stream from, which is an XML file. But for now, we're just going to focus on this RTSP for demo purposes. I'm just going to hit install. Okay, after clicking install, I ran through the installation, and it looks like it's all set up. So I'm going to click finish here. Now, one thing that did not happen during that installation, or something that I would advise, is firstly, install all relevant hotfixes for version 4.6 SP1. Also, it's good if you can actually set an environment variable, which I'm going to do here. I'm going to set an environment variable for SFT underscore softgrid server. And I'm going to set the variable name again to the host name of my management server. Now why I do this is just because during the actual AppV sequencing, your OSD files, which I'll get into later on, need to point to your streaming server of choice. And by using that variable, you can variabilize it for all your AppV sequences. Therefore, if you ever change the management server that you're using or streaming server that you're using, it's merely a case of updating that environment variable. You don't have to go and modify your existing application. Now with the AppV management server and the AppV client machine set up, we are free to test out and validate that our setup is completed correctly. Now if you can remember, there was a default application that's there on install of the management server. So we can go ahead and we can configure that default application so that we can run it. So the default, which we can see is on our content here, if you browse to the hostname/content, and if you go to the OSD file, do an open with Notepad, you can see this is an XML based file. Now for now, you don't have to worry too much about this. We'll go into it in more detail later on. But you can see there's a code base href, which is pointing to our environment variable, SFT software server, which is the host name of our management server. It's using port 322 and RTSPS as the streaming protocol. Now that is not what we set ours up with. We set it up as RTSP and port 554. So we could go and we can modify this to be correct for our setup. Now if I hit save. Now to test this default application, what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify my registry. I'm going to modify the registry under local machine, Microsoft, SoftGrid, 4.5 client permissions, and I'm going to modify the add app. And I'm going to make this value to 1. This will allow me and users of this machine to actually cache applications themselves. So I'm not relying on the management server to cache my application. This is just for testing purposes, as I said. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm actually going to open with the Microsoft Application Virtualization client tray, and this should stream the application. And there you go. There we have it. So it looks like our streaming is actually working. This is just the default test application. There isn't actually any functionality to it, but it's a good starting point. We verified that our client can stream from the server. In this video, we're going to go ahead and set up the AppV sequencer. Now, as I said in a previous video, you will need to go to the Microsoft support page and download hotfix number 3 for AppV 4.6 SP1. That is because Microsoft updated the sequencer. So, to save time, I went ahead and I downloaded the hotfix, and I'm just going to go to the correct x86 version of this setup.exe for sequencing. You can see, again, the installer has picked up that there's a prerequisite that is not met, and so it's telling me that it's going to install Microsoft's Visual C++ 2005 SP1 redistributable. So I'm going to hit install and allow it to do that. Okay, now we're ready to install the actual sequencer. So hit next on the welcome screen. Again, accept the license agreement. You can either join the Customer Experience Improvement Program or not. I'm just going to install to the default C Program Files directory. You select which drive you want to sequence to. So, like we stated for the AppV client setup, there needs to be a universal free drive in your environment because that's used to host the virtual environment for use by your virtual applications. So we picked Q for the AppV client setup, so I'm going to go ahead and leave the default of Q for this. And now it's ready to install. Okay, the installation is completed. So we can select to launch the application or not. Let's go ahead and launch it, why not? And here you see you've got your AppV sequencer. And that's it. We can just confirm that our Q drive got set up, which it did. We can see it here. And the shortcut should be present under Programs, Microsoft Application Virtualization, which it is. That's the setup of the sequencer complete. Very quick and easy.